If you have been paying any attention to dementia news over the past month, you may have seen headlines that stopped you in your tracks. Something along the lines of Alzheimer's drugs don't actually work, or major study finds new treatments provide no meaningful benefit. And if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's disease, especially early Alzheimer's disease, those headlines may have left you feeling scared, confused, or maybe even a little betrayed. Because for the past couple of years, many of you have heard about these new drugs, lecanemab, donanemab, and you've heard them described as breakthroughs, the first treatments ever that actually slow the progression of Alzheimer's, not just manage symptoms. And now a major, highly respected research organization is saying they don't work. I hear from caregivers all the time who say things like, I don't know what to believe anymore. One week it's a breakthrough, the next it's useless. My mother was just approved to start one of these drugs, and now I'm terrified we made the wrong decision. Or how are we supposed to know what decisions to make for our loved ones when the experts can't even agree what works? Those concerns, those questions, all of them are completely warranted. This is genuinely complicated, and you deserve a clear, honest breakdown of what this study actually found, what experts are saying, its limitations, and most importantly, what this means for you and your family, practically speaking. This is exactly what I'm going to try to do today. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand what the Cochrane review study actually looked like, why it's creating so much debate, and the 3 questions you should be able to ask your loved one's doctor, regardless of which side of the debate you fall on. So for many caregivers, here's what they're experiencing after all of the news and headlines about this Cochrane study. Your loved one has early stage Alzheimer's disease, or maybe they have mild cognitive impairment or mild dementia. These drugs are relevant for you because they were specifically designed for that stage. So these newer drugs are designed for MCI or early dementia, not for moderate or advanced dementia. Early stage only. Some of you, like some of the members inside of my care collective, your loved one's already on one of these drugs. They're already going through these infusion treatments. Some of you have been maybe discussing the option with a neurologist. Some of you maybe have already had a family meeting about them. Some of you have decided not to pursue them and are wondering if you made the right call. And then this headline drops, and suddenly we have questions all over again. I want to be clear that this is not a simple story. Anyone who's presenting this study as these drugs are useless and don't help, or this study is completely wrong, they're not giving you the full picture. So let's look at what actually happened. On April 16th, 2026, I'm recording this April 26th, so 10 days ago at the time I'm recording this, a major organization called the Cochrane Collaboration published what they call a systemic review. For those of you who aren't familiar, Cochrane is one of the most well-respected independent research review bodies in the world. They don't do new research themselves. What they do is they take a large number of existing studies and they combine them to look for patterns. The idea is that combining data from many studies gives you a more reliable answer than any single study alone. For this review, the researchers looked at 17 clinical trials involving over 20,000 participants. They were evaluating a class of drugs called anti-amyloid monoclonal antibodies, drugs designed to target and clear amyloid plaques from the brain. These plaques are a hallmark feature of Alzheimer's disease, and the theory behind these drugs is that if we clear the plaque, we might be able to slow the progression of the disease. Their conclusion: the effect of these drugs on cognitive function and dementia severity at 18 months was, in their words, trivial. And on a functional ability level, meaning that a person's ability to do daily tasks, they called the effect small at best. They also found that these drugs significantly increase the risk of something called amyloid-related imaging abnormalities, or ARIA for short, which essentially means the brain swells, the brain has swelling and bleeding, and that shows up on MRI scans. In the clinical trials, somewhere between 12 and 35% of patients on these drugs experienced ARIA. So their brain swelled or had bleeding. Most of their cases were mild and went away on their own, but about 1 to 2% of the patients, the symptoms were serious, including headaches, confusion, seizures, and vision changes. So on its face, the review is saying questionable benefit, real risk. And that's an alarming combination to hear. But here's where things get complicated and what most of the headlines are missing. The scientific community has responded to the review with some criticism, and I want to be fair because both sides do have a point. Here is the core problem that many of the researchers are pointing to. Of the 17 studies that the Cochrane review analyzed, 12 of them were drugs that failed. Some of them failed badly. 3 of the studies were on a drug called aducanumab, which failed one of its 2 pivotal clinical trials and was eventually withdrawn from the market entirely. Many of the other drugs in the analysis were discontinued because they didn't work. So only 2 of the 17 drugs were on the drugs that are actually currently FDA approved and available to patients today. Those are lecanemab and donanemab. The review essentially averaged the results of 12 drugs that didn't work together with 2 drugs that did work, and then concluded that the whole class of drugs doesn't work. One researcher put it this way: mixing up drugs that failed with the ones that actually changed clinical practice turns therapeutic practice into statistical noise. It's a little bit like averaging the test scores of 12 students who failed the exam with 2 students who passed, and then concluding that nobody passed the exam. Now, to be fair, the Cochrane researchers, they would say that this is exactly what systemic reviews do. They evaluate a whole class of treatments. They don't just cherry pick successes. And their point about the risk of brain swelling and bleeding is real, regardless of which drug we are talking about. They all came with the risk of ARIA. But here's where it lands practically. The UK regulator, MHRA, reviewed lecanemab and donanemab separately and concluded there is a small but meaningful benefit. The FDA in the United States approved both drugs. These are the same regulatory bodies that are required to weigh real-world risk against real-world benefit. They did not conclude that these drugs are useless. This is a genuine scientific debate. It's not a conspiracy. It's not one side lying. Smart, well-meaning people looking at the same data and reaching different conclusions about how to interpret it. That is how science works sometimes, especially at the frontier of a complex disease. So what does this mean practically? Here are 3 questions you can ask your doctor about. First, and I want to say this very clearly, this review does not mean that if your loved one is already on lecanemab or donanemab, that you should stop the medication. It is not a recall. There's no safety emergency. This is a research debate. And if you have concerns that whether or not this is the right move for your loved one, this is a conversation for you to have with your loved one's neurologist, not a panicked decision to discontinue. Second, if your loved one is being considered for one of these drugs, this review is a useful tool. It's a reminder to have a very open, honest, informed conversation with the prescribing physician. So here are the 3 questions I would encourage you to bring to that conversation. 1, what specific benefit do you realistically expect for my loved one? And how will we know if it's working? The clinical trials show that these drugs slow decline by roughly 25 to 35%. They don't stop it. They don't reverse it. They slow it by months, not by years. For some families, that's meaningful and significant. For others, given the appointments required, the monitoring required, the risk of side effects, it might not be worth it. Only you can decide that, but you should decide it with accurate expectations and an open conversation with the doctor prescribing it. 2, what is your loved one's specific risk for ARIA? Risk is not the same for every person. People who carry 2 copies of the APOE4 gene have a significantly higher risk of brain swelling and bleeding on these drugs. Some clinics say they won't even offer these treatments to people who have 2 copies of the APOE4 genes. Other clinics will take that risk and say we'll still do it anyway. People on blood thinners face elevated risk as well. Your neurologist should be walking you through your loved one's individual risk profile, not just average statistics. Number 3, is my loved one still safe for this treatment? Is this even a treatment we should be considering? These drugs are only studied and approved for early Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment. So if your loved one has progressed beyond that stage, these drugs are not indicated for them regardless of what the research says. The window for these treatments is narrow, and that matters. And it also might be another reason why pursuing diagnosis early on is important if you are somebody who does want to try one of these treatments. I want to offer a mindset shift here. Understanding that there is a genuine scientific debate doesn't mean you're stuck in uncertainty. It means you're informed, and being informed means that you can ask better questions, set more realistic expectations, and make decisions that are right for your specific family, not for a headline. All right, Careblazer, I am sorry dementia treatments are confusing and not clear. And I'm even more sorry that it's not really all that significant and wonderful. What we're seeing is pretty modest in terms of benefit, but that can mean a lot for some families. I hope this doesn't bring on any hopelessness. I hope this doesn't bring on any fear. I hope it gives a very honest viewpoint perspective on both sides of what is being talked about, given that this study just recently came out. Navigating dementia, especially nowadays, feels like it's constantly changing. It feels like there's not a lot of clear answers. It's especially hard because even the experts in this field do not fully agree. I hope that this helps you in some way. I am going to link the full Cochrane systemic review study below in this video so that if you want to deep dive into the details yourself and not take my word for it, you can click on it and access it. You can also, there in the description, sign up for our free weekly newsletter called the Dementia Dose that I personally write every single week with a message of encouragement, inspiration, a tip, a strategy, some sort of message that I believe can help make your caregiving journey a little bit more joyful, easier. That's my wish for that Dementia Dose newsletter. There's a link in the description where you can check out our Care Collective. If you are somebody who is feeling alone in this caregiving journey, you wish that you had a community of supportive people that you don't have to convince, who will support you, who want to be there with you. That's what our Care Collective program is all about. You'll get to know me. I'll get to know you. You'll get to know our other experts and other Careblazers. It's truly amazing. The link for that is below as well. Careblazer, I'm sending you so much love. I'll be back next week with another video. Till then, keep up the great work. Bye.
Also, Nico gets a belly rub for every person who subscribes from this video. So if you haven't already, click the red subscribe button. It's totally free. And Nico says, thank you very much.